Sometimes the people who smile at you across the dinner table are the same ones plotting your downfall in the shadows. What they don't realize is that some of us have been watching too, calculating every move, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal just how deep their betrayal runs. They never see the trap until it's already closed around them. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. You won't believe how this story ends. My name is Nora. I am 32 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington, in a modest apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. Every morning, I watch the ferries cut through the dark water, carrying people toward their destinations with quiet determination. That image has always resonated with me moving forward, despite the currents that try to push you off course. For the past 8 years, I've worked at Meridian Financial Group, a mid-sized investment firm downtown. I started as a junior analyst straight out of graduate school, armed with nothing but a business degree and the kind of hunger that comes from growing up with parents who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. While my colleagues complained about their starter salaries over expensive lunches, I was packing homemade sandwiches and putting every spare dollar into my savings account. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd chosen a career helping wealthy people grow their money while I've grown up counting pennies. That I was good at it, better than good. I had an intuitive understanding of market patterns and client psychology that my Ivy League colleagues couldn't replicate with all their theoretical knowledge. Within 3 years, I'd been promoted to senior analyst. Within 5, I was leading my own team. But there was always this invisible ceiling hovering just above my reach, and I'd begun to suspect that my sister-in-law, Cassandra, had something to do with it. Cassandra married my older brother Marcus 6 years ago, and from the moment she walked into our family, she carried herself like she belonged to a different social stratum than the rest of us, which, to be fair, she did. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Pacific Northwest, and she'd grown up in Bellevue's most exclusive neighborhood, the kind where the driveways were longer than most people's commutes. She was beautiful in that effortless way that comes from good genetics and expensive maintenance honey blonde hair that never seemed to frizz in Seattle's relentless drizzle, porcelain skin that suggested she'd never worked a day outdoors, and the kind of slender frame that looked elegant in designer clothes. More importantly, she had connections, the kind of network that opened doors before you even knew you wanted to walk through them. 2 years after marrying Marcus, Cassandra landed a position as communications director at Meridian Financial Group. Not in my department, thankfully, but close enough that our paths crossed regularly. She reported directly to Victoria Chen, our chief marketing officer, and by all accounts, she was competent at her job. She understood how to craft the company's public image, how to massage bad news and amplify good news, how to make our quarterly reports sound like love letters to potential investors. What bothered me wasn't her success. I could respect talent, even when it came wrapped in privilege. What bothered me was how she seemed to take credit for my achievements at every family gathering. "Oh, Nora's doing well at Meridian too," she'd say whenever relatives asked about her job. Always with that slight emphasis on too, as if my career was somehow a footnote to hers. We're both climbing the ladder there. It's such a competitive environment, but we're managing to make our mark. Our mark, as if we were some kind of team. The worst part was how my family ate it up. Marcus beamed with pride whenever Cassandra spoke about their success at the company. My parents, who'd sacrificed so much to put me through school, nodded approvingly as she described strategic initiatives I'd never heard of. Marketing campaigns that sounded impressive, but probably cost more than my annual salary. I tried to correct the narrative a few times, to mention the clients I brought in or the deals I'd structured, but somehow my accomplishments always sounded smaller when spoken aloud. Cassandra had a gift for making her work sound vital and glamorous, while mine sounded technical and dry. When I talked about analyzing market volatility or restructuring investment portfolios, People's eyes glazed over. When she talked about brand positioning and stakeholder engagement, they nodded like she was revealing the secrets of the universe. The breaking point came last spring. During Marcus and Cassandra's 4th wedding anniversary dinner, the entire family was gathered at an upscale restaurant in Kirkland-McKind, a place where the waitstaff described each dish like they were reciting poetry, and the wine list required a small business loan. I just closed the biggest deal of my career that week, bringing in a new client whose portfolio was worth $12 million. It had taken months of careful cultivation, dozens of meetings, and a presentation that I'd rehearsed until I could deliver it in my sleep. The commission alone would put me in a different tax bracket. I was feeling confident, maybe even a little proud, when Cassandra raised her champagne glass for a toast. "To 4 amazing years," she began, smiling at Marcus with the kind of adoration that still looked genuine after all this time. "And to the incredible support system that's helped us both thrive professionally. I know I couldn't have achieved what I have at Meridian without having such a strong foundation at home." Everyone raised their glasses, murmuring agreement. I was mid-sip when she continued. "And of course, it's been wonderful having Nora there as well. It's given me such insight into how the financial side of the business works. All those late-night conversations about market trends and client management have really helped me understand what our investors are looking for when they read our communications." I nearly choked on my champagne. Late-night conversations. We barely spoke at work beyond polite hellos in the elevator. I'd never discussed market trends with her, never shared any insights about client management. Everything she knew about the financial side of the business she'd learned from her own job or from industry publications. But the way she said it, with such casual confidence, made it sound like I'd been her informal mentor all along, like my expertise had somehow contributed to her success, rather than the other way around. "Nora's been such a valuable resource," she continued, and I caught something in her tone that made my stomach drop. "Always so generous with her knowledge. I think that collaborative spirit is really what makes family businesses work so well." Family businesses. As if Meridian Financial Group was some kind of mom-and-pop operation that we were running together. I looked around the table and saw my parents nodding proudly, my aunt and uncle smiling approvingly. Marcus was practically glowing with happiness, clearly thrilled that his wife and sister got along so well professionally. "To collaboration," my father said, raising his glass higher. "To family supporting family." My mother added. Everyone drank, and I found myself going through the motions, even as something cold and sharp settled in my chest. In the span of 2 minutes, Cassandra had managed to reframe my entire career as a supporting role in her success story. She'd taken my expertise, my late nights, my $12 million client, and turned them into props in her narrative of collaborative achievement. The worst part was how smoothly she'd done it. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound petty or defensive. If I tried to clarify that we'd never had those conversations, I'd look like I was diminishing the importance of family support. If I mentioned my recent deal, it would sound like I was trying to compete with her during her anniversary dinner. She'd cornered me perfectly, and judging by the satisfied smile she wore for the rest of the evening, she knew it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to the distant hum of late-night traffic on I-5. Something had shifted during dinner, some understanding I hadn't wanted to acknowledge finally surfacing in my mind. Cassandra wasn't just taking credit for my work accidentally, or out of some misguided sense of family unity. She was doing it strategically, systematically, as part of a larger pattern I'd been too close to see. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I noticed how she always seemed to know about my projects before I discussed them with anyone outside my immediate team. How she'd casually mention insights about financial trends in her marketing materials that sounded suspiciously similar to analysis I'd shared in internal reports. How she'd drop my name in conversations with senior leadership, not as a colleague, but as someone who'd helped inform her understanding of complex financial instruments. "I was just talking to Nora about the volatility in emerging markets," she'd say during strategy meetings. "According to my friend Lauren, who worked in HR and heard things through the office grapevine, she gave me some fascinating insights that I think could really shape how we position our international funds in the next quarterly newsletter." The thing was, I had written about volatility in emerging markets in a detailed internal memo that had been circulated to senior staff 3 weeks earlier. A memo that Cassandra shouldn't have had access to unless someone forwarded it to her specifically. I started keeping track, a notebook hidden in my desk drawer where I recorded every instance of overlap between my work and her public statements. The pattern became undeniable within a month. Cassandra wasn't just passively benefiting from being associated with me, she was actively monitoring my work, extracting value from it, and repackaging it as her own strategic thinking. She was using our family connection as both a source of inside information and a shield against accusations of intellectual theft. After all, who was going to accuse someone of stealing ideas from their sister-in-law? We were family. We were supposed to support each other. The realization should have made me angrier than it did. Instead, I felt something closer to fascination. Cassandra was playing a much more sophisticated game than I'd given her credit for. She wasn't just a privileged pretty face who'd lucked into a good job. She was strategic, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient at leveraging every advantage she had. I could almost admire her for it, if she hadn't chosen me as her unwitting accomplice, but two could play at strategic games, and I'd been underestimated for long enough. The opportunity came in late June, when Victoria Chun announced her resignation. She'd been offered the CMO position at a tech startup in San Francisco, one of those companies that burned through venture capital while promising to revolutionize something that already worked perfectly well. The salary was apparently too good to pass up, even though it meant leaving behind 8 years of relationship building at Meridian. Victoria's departure sent ripples through the entire company. As Chief Marketing Officer, she'd been responsible not just for external communications, but for strategic positioning, client relationship management, and liaison work with our biggest institutional investors. It was a role that required both creative vision and deep understanding of financial markets, exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary expertise that I'd been developing for years. The official job posting went up on a Monday morning, and by Tuesday, I'd submitted my application. I knew it was a long shot. I'd never worked directly in marketing, and my background was entirely on the financial side. But I also knew that I understood our clients better than anyone in the communications department, and I had ideas about how we could better serve their needs while growing our market share. More importantly, I was hungry for it in a way that went beyond simple career ambition. This felt like my chance to finally step out of the shadows, to build something that was undeniably mine. I wasn't the only one interested. Over the next few days, I heard through the office grapevine that several external candidates were being considered, along with a few internal applicants. Cassandra's name came up frequently. She'd been Victoria's right hand for 2 years. She knew the client base, and she already had relationships with key stakeholders. She was the obvious choice. Really, the safe choice. The choice that made sense on paper. Which was why I was surprised when Jennifer Walsh, our CEO, called me into her office the following Thursday morning. Jennifer was in her 50s, a former investment banker who transitioned to wealth management and built Meridian from a 2-person operation into one of the most respected firms in the Northwest. She had silver hair that she wore in a perfectly professional bob, sharp grey eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of quiet authority that made people lean in when she spoke. "Nora," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her massive glass desk. "Thank you for coming in. I wanted to discuss your application for Victoria's position." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course, I'm very interested in the role. I can see that from your cover letter. Very thorough analysis of our current market position, and some intriguing suggestions for expansion. She picked up a printed copy of my application, flipping through pages that were covered in her handwritten notes. Tell me, what makes you think you're qualified for a marketing leadership role when your entire background is in financial analysis? It was a fair question, and one I'd anticipated. I think the line between financial analysis and marketing has become increasingly blurred in our industry. Our clients don't just want good returns anymore. They want to understand the story behind their investments, the strategic thinking that drives our recommendations. I've spent 8 years learning how to communicate complex financial concepts in ways that build trust and confidence. That's marketing, just targeted at a very specific audience. Jennifer nodded slowly. And you think you could scale that approach to broader communications? I think our marketing has been focused on telling people what we want them to know, rather than addressing what they actually want to understand. We spend a lot of energy making our quarterly reports sound optimistic, but what clients really want is transparency about risk management and strategic thinking. They want to feel like partners in the process, not passive recipients of our expertise. Interesting. She made a note on my application. What would you do differently then? Victoria? This was dangerous territory. Victoria had been well-liked and professionally successful. Criticizing her approach too directly would make me sound arrogant or disloyal. Victoria did an excellent job building our brand recognition and maintaining positive relationships with financial media, I said carefully. But I think there's an opportunity to be more proactive about thought leadership. Instead of just responding to market events, we could be anticipating them, helping clients understand trends before they become headlines. That requires someone who can bridge the analytical and communications functions. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those sharp grey eyes. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. I'm going to be frank with you, Nora. Several people have suggested that this role should go to Cassandra. She has more traditional marketing experience. She knows our current systems and processes, and she's already established relationships with key stakeholders. On paper, she's the logical choice. My heart sank. But I tried to keep my expression neutral. However, Jennifer continued, I've been watching both of your work for the past few years, and I've noticed something interesting. Some of our most successful client communications have been informed by insights that seem to originate from your analysis, that get packaged through Cassandra's department. It's made me wonder whether we've been underutilizing your strategic thinking. I felt a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or vindication. I've always tried to be collaborative across departments. Yes, I've noticed that too. There was something in her tone that suggested she'd noticed more than I'd realized. Tell me, if you got this position, how would you handle the transition? It would mean supervising people who currently outrank you, including Cassandra. The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. This was the moment where I could either play it safe or show her exactly how much I understood about the game we were all playing. I think the most important thing would be to establish clear expectations and accountability from the beginning, I said. Everyone would need to understand that past relationships and informal arrangements wouldn't carry forward into the new structure. Success would be measured by results and collaboration, not by history or connections. Jennifer's eyes sharpened. That's a diplomatic way of saying you'd clean house. That's a diplomatic way of saying I'd make sure everyone's contributions were properly credited, and that all information flowed through appropriate channels. She smiled for the first time during the conversation, a small, knowing smile that told me she understood exactly what I was really saying. I'll be conducting final interviews next week, she said, standing up to signal the end of our meeting. I'll let you know by Friday where we stand. I thanked her and headed back to my office, my mind racing. The conversation had gone better than I dared hope. But I knew better than to get my hopes up too high. Jennifer might have noticed the pattern of my ideas ending up in Cassandra's work, but that didn't necessarily mean she'd be willing to upset the office dynamics by promoting me over a more obvious candidate. Still, for the first time in years, I felt like someone in leadership was really seeing me, not as a supporting player in someone else's success story, but as a strategic thinker in my own right. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice Cassandra waiting by my desk when I returned. "Hey," she said, her voice carrying that perfectly calibrated warmth she used in professional settings. "I heard Jennifer called you in. Everything okay?" There was something in her expression, a tightness around her eyes, a slight tension in her smile, that told me she already knew what the meeting had been about. "Just routine check-in stuff," I said, settling into my chair and pretending to focus on my computer screen. "You know how she is about keeping tabs on everyone's projects." "Of course." Cassandra perched on the edge of my desk, a casual gesture that established intimacy while positioning her physically above me. "Although I have to say, I was a little surprised to hear you'd applied for Victoria's job. I mean, it's such a different field from what you've been doing here." It was the conversation I'd been expecting since my application went in. "I thought it might be an interesting challenge," I said evenly. "I've been doing financial analysis for 8 years. Maybe it's time to try something new." "That's so brave of you." Her tone was supportive, even admiring, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. I mean, it's such a competitive process, and there are so many qualified candidates, internal and external. But you never know, right? Sometimes companies like to consider unconventional choices, just to show they're thinking outside the box. The message was clear. I was the token unconventional choice, the candidate they'd interview to demonstrate due diligence before giving the job to the obvious selection. "You're probably right," I said, still not looking up from my screen. I figured I didn't have much to lose by throwing my hat in the ring. "Absolutely. And hey, even if this doesn't work out, it's great that you're thinking strategically about your career development. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime and brainstorm other opportunities that might be a better fit for your skill set." The condescension was so perfectly wrapped in sisterly concern that it took my breath away. She was already positioning herself as the mentor who'd help me navigate my disappointment, the family member who'd console me when I didn't get the job that was never really mine to begin with. "That's really thoughtful of you," I said, finally looking up to meet her eyes. "I'd love to hear your perspective on strategic career planning." Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, that I wasn't pushing back against her narrative. She'd expected me to be defensive or competitive. Instead, I was agreeing with her, accepting her framework, playing the role she'd assigned me. "Great," she said, sliding off my desk. "I'll send you a calendar invite. And Nora, whatever happens with this job, I want you to know how proud I am of you for putting yourself out there. It takes real courage to reach for something that's probably beyond your current capabilities." She squeezed my shoulder in what anyone watching would interpret as a supportive gesture, then walked away, her heels clicking confidently against the tile floor. I sat there for a long moment after she left, processing what had just happened. Cassandra hadn't just been condescending, she'd been threatened. Threatened enough to come to my desk personally, to make sure I understood my place in the office hierarchy, to remind me that she was the family member with real influence and connections, which meant she wasn't as confident about getting the job as she'd wanted me to believe. Over the next few days, I noticed Cassandra ramping up her visibility around the office. She was staying later, scheduling more meetings with senior staff, and finding excuses to drop by Jennifer's office with updates on various projects. She'd also started mentioning her interview preparations in casual conversation, discussing strategic visions and leadership philosophies with anyone who'd listen. I've been thinking a lot about how to position Meridian for the next phase of growth, she told a group of us during lunch in the break room. The financial services industry is becoming so commoditized. What really differentiates firms now is their ability to tell compelling stories about value creation. It was a smart observation, and one that aligned perfectly with the points I'd made in my interview with Jennifer, which wasn't a coincidence. I realized Cassandra had probably heard through the office grapevine about my conversation with Jennifer, and she was adapting her own positioning to address the same strategic opportunities I'd identified. She was good at this game, better than I'd given her credit for, but I'd been playing it longer than she knew. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in 8 years at Meridian. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus Well, our head of client relations, and asked him to lunch outside the office. Marcus was one of those people who seemed to know everything about everyone at the company. He'd been at Meridian for 12 years, had survived 3 different leadership changes, and had a gift for reading office politics that bordered on supernatural. If anyone could give me insight into how the CMO decision was really being made, it would be him. We met at a quiet restaurant in Pioneer Square, the kind of place where business conversations could happen without interruption. "So," Marcus said after we'd ordered, "I hear congratulations are in order. Word is you made quite an impression in your interview with Jennifer." I tried not to look too surprised that he already knew about a conversation that had happened less than a week ago. I'm not sure I'd go that far. It was just a preliminary discussion. Preliminary discussions don't usually last 45 minutes, he said with a knowing smile. And they don't usually result in Jennifer asking the HR department for detailed performance reviews on specific candidates. My heart jumped. She requested my performance reviews, among others, but yes, yours were pulled first. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "You know, I've been wondering when you'd finally make a move like this. You've been undervalued in your current role for years. Have I?" "Come on, Nora. We both know half the strategic insights in our quarterly communications come from your analysis. The question is whether Jennifer's figured out the same thing. This was the opening I'd been hoping for." "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he leaned forward. "Look, Cassandra's good at her job. She knows how to manage stakeholder relationships. She understands brand positioning, and she's got the kind of polished presentation style that clients expect from a CMO. But strategy? Real strategic thinking about market positioning and competitive advantage. That's not her strength. What is her strength? Packaging other people's ideas in ways that make them sound brilliant and original." He paused. "Which is a valuable skill, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same thing as generating those ideas in the first place." I felt a surge of vindication, so strong it was almost dizzying. Someone else had noticed. Someone else had been paying attention to the same patterns I'd been tracking. "Do you think Jennifer sees it that way?" "I think Jennifer sees everything," Marcus said. "The question is what she plans to do about it." Our food arrived, and we spent the rest of lunch talking about safer topics, market trends, client relationships, weekend plans. But as we walked back to the office, Marcus stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Nora, can I give you some advice?" I nodded. "Whatever happens with this job, don't let anyone make you feel like you're not qualified for it. You've been doing CMO-level strategic thinking for years. The only difference is that until now, someone else has been getting credit for it." That night, I went home to my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay and did something I hadn't done since college. I opened a bottle of wine, put on my most comfortable clothes, and spread all my work from the past 2 years across my dining room table. I wanted to see the full scope of what Cassandra had been doing, not just the obvious instances where she'd repurposed my analysis, but the subtler ways she'd built her reputation on insights that had originated from my work. It took me 4 hours to map it all out. But by the time I finished, I had a clear picture of a systematic pattern that stretched back almost 18 months. Cassandra hadn't just borrowed a few ideas. She'd essentially been conducting an invisible collaboration, taking my research and strategic thinking and repackaging it as her own leadership vision. The most damning example was a presentation she'd given to the board of directors 6 months earlier about emerging opportunities in ESG investment communication. The entire framework had been lifted from a white paper I'd written about environmental, social, and governance investing trends and how financial firms could better serve clients who were interested in sustainable investment options. Cassandra had taken my analysis about client demand for ESG products, my research on regulatory changes, and my recommendations for how Meridian could position itself in this growing market, and she'd turned it into a marketing strategy that the board had praised as visionary and exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach that would set Meridian apart from competitors. She'd gotten a bonus for that presentation, a significant bonus, according to the company-wide email that had celebrated her innovative thinking and strategic leadership. I stared at the document spread across my table, feeling something I'd never experienced before, a cold, crystalline anger that had nothing to do with heat or emotion, and everything to do with absolute clarity. Cassandra hadn't just been taking credit for my work. She'd been systematically undermining my ability to get credit for my own ideas by presenting them as her strategic insights first. Every time I tried to discuss my analysis in meetings or presentations, it sounded like I was repeating points that had already been made more eloquently by someone else. She'd been stealing my voice, and she'd been doing it so skillfully that even I hadn't fully understood what was happening until now. But Marcus had been right about one thing. Jennifer saw everything, which meant there was a good chance she'd noticed the same patterns I was now documenting. The final interviews were scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing, but not in the way I'd originally planned. Instead of focusing on my qualifications or my vision for the marketing department, I prepared to tell the truth about what had been happening at Meridian for the past 18 months. Not in an accusatory way that would make me look petty and unprofessional, but in a strategic way that demonstrated both the scope of the problem and my ability to solve it. Jennifer's office felt different when I walked in Tuesday morning, more formal, more high stakes. She'd moved her laptop aside and had a legal pad filled with handwritten questions in front of her. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. Nora, thank you for coming in. I've had a chance to review your performance evaluations and get feedback from several colleagues about your application. She looked up from her notes. The consensus seems to be that you're highly qualified analytically. But there are questions about your leadership experience and your ability to manage creative professionals who approach problems differently than financial analysts do. It was a fair concern, and one I'd expected. I think leadership is ultimately about helping people do their best work, regardless of what field they're in. The specifics might vary, but the core principles are the same: clear communication, appropriate support, and accountability for results. And how would you establish accountability in a department where success is often subjective? This was the question I'd been preparing for all weekend. I'd start by creating clear metrics for measuring the impact of our communications on client acquisition, retention, and satisfaction. Marketing shouldn't exist in isolation from business outcomes. If our messaging is effective, it should show up in measurable ways: increased inquiries, better client feedback, stronger relationships with institutional investors. Jennifer made a note. That's a very analytical approach. It's a strategic approach. Right now, I think we're measuring marketing success by outputs. How many newsletters we send, how many media mentions we get, how polished our presentations look. But what really matters is outcomes. Are we attracting the right clients? Are we communicating value in ways that build trust? Are we positioning Meridian as a thought leader in areas where we actually have expertise to offer? And you think the current approach is missing that focus? This was dangerous territory, but it was also why I was really here. I think the current approach has been very successful at managing our public image, but there's been a disconnect between our external communications and our internal strategic thinking. Sometimes our marketing materials make promises about market insights and strategic positioning that don't fully reflect the depth of analysis we're actually doing. Jennifer's eyes sharpened. Can you give me an example? I pulled out a folder. I prepared 2 documents side by side. One was Cassandra's ESG presentation to the board. The other was my original white paper on sustainable investing trends. 6 months ago, we presented a comprehensive strategy for positioning Meridian as a leader in ESG investment communication. It was well received by the board and has informed several of our recent marketing campaigns. I slid the documents across her desk, but if you compare the strategic framework in that presentation to analysis that was circulating internally several weeks earlier, you'll notice some significant overlap. Jennifer picked up both documents, her expression carefully neutral. She read in silence for several minutes, and I watched her face change as she recognized the patterns I'd been tracking for months. "This is your analysis," she said finally. "Yes." "And this presentation was delivered by Cassandra?" "Yes." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, flipping between the 2 documents. When she looked up again, her expression was grim. "How long has this been happening?" "About 18 months, maybe longer." I pulled out the rest of my documentation, examples of overlapping content, timeline correlations, instances where my internal analysis had appeared in external communications without attribution. I started keeping track after I noticed that strategic insights I'd shared in team meetings were showing up in marketing materials without any indication that they'd originated from financial analysis. Jennifer studied the documentation with the focused intensity of someone who'd built a successful business by paying attention to details others missed. After several minutes, she looked up. "Why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself, honestly. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. And then, when I realized it was systematic, I wasn't sure how to address it without seeming like I was attacking a family member. Cassandra is married to my brother. Bringing this to leadership felt like it could destroy relationships that go beyond work. And what change? I thought about that anniversary dinner, about Cassandra's toast that had rewritten my career as a supporting role in her success story, about all the family gatherings where my achievements had been diminished or redirected, about the conversation by my desk where she'd made it clear that she saw this job as rightfully hers and me as an inconvenient obstacle. I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting those relationships. It was just enabling behavior that was ultimately going to damage both the company and our family dynamic. I paused, and I realized that I'd been undervaluing my own contributions for so long that I'd almost started believing they weren't worth protecting. Jennifer nodded slowly. "If you got this position, how would you handle the situation with Cassandra?" "The same way I'd handle any situation where there were questions about intellectual property and proper attribution. I'd establish clear policies about how strategic insights get developed, documented, and shared across departments. I'd make sure everyone understood the importance of crediting sources and collaborating transparently. And I'd hold everyone accountable to the same standards, regardless of their relationships or history with the company, even if it made things difficult at home. Especially if it made things difficult at home. Professional integrity can't be subordinated to family politics." Jennifer closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Nora, I'm going to be honest with you. What you've shown me today is concerning. But it's also impressive. Concerning because it suggests we've had a significant breakdown in our internal processes. Impressive because you've documented it thoroughly, approached it strategically, and presented solutions rather than just complaints. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it. I've been thinking about this position in terms of marketing experience and creative leadership, but maybe that's been the wrong framework. Maybe what we really need is someone who understands the relationship between strategy and communication, who can ensure that our external messaging authentically reflects our internal capabilities. She paused. Someone who can build bridges between departments instead of creating silos. That's exactly what I think this role should be. I'm going to need some time to think about this, and I'm going to need to have some conversations with other people about what you've shared today. Jennifer stood up, signaling the end of the interview. But I want you to know that I'm grateful you brought this to my attention. Regardless of how the job decision goes, this is something I need to address. I thanked her and left her office feeling like I'd just jumped off a cliff either. I'd finally taken control of my career trajectory, or I'd just destroyed my relationship with my sister-in-law. My job security and my family dynamics all in one catastrophic conversation. There was no going back now. The next 3 days were the longest of my professional life. I threw myself into my regular work, trying to maintain normal routines while my entire future hung in the balance. I avoided Cassandra as much as possible, which wasn't difficult since she seemed to be avoiding me too. The few times our paths crossed in the office, she was polite but distant, as if she'd sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the game we'd been playing. On Friday afternoon, Jennifer's assistant called and asked if I could meet with her at the end of the day. I spent the final 2 hours of work oscillating between hope and terror, rehearsing gracious responses to both good news and bad news. When I walked into Jennifer's office at 5:30, she was sitting with David Kim, our head of human resources. That could mean anything. I was involved in both hiring decisions and disciplinary actions. Nora, please sit down, Jennifer said, her expression unreadable. David and I have been discussing your interview and the information you shared with me earlier this week. My mouth went dry, of course. First, I want you to know that we've conducted a thorough review of the documentation you provided, and we've spoken with several other team members about the patterns you identified. David leaned forward slightly. What you brought to our attention represents a serious breach of professional standards and intellectual property protocols. My heart sank. They were going to discipline me for not reporting it sooner, or for the way I'd handled the situation, or for some procedural violation I hadn't considered. However, Jennifer continued, we want to be clear that you handled this situation appropriately by bringing it to leadership attention, and your documentation was thorough and professional. You've helped us identify a systemic problem that we need to address. I felt a flicker of hope. What happens now? Now, we fix it, Jennifer said simply. David has already begun conversations with Cassandra about proper attribution policies and the importance of transparent collaboration across departments. We'll be implementing new procedures for how strategic insights are developed, shared, and credited company-wide. And the CMO position? Jennifer and David exchanged a look. The CMO position is yours, if you want it, Jennifer said. Your interview demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and cross-departmental leadership we need. More importantly, your handling of this situation showed us that you have the integrity and judgment we require in senior leadership. The words hit me like a physical force. After 8 years of being overlooked, undervalued, and systematically undermined, I was finally being seen for who I actually was. Thank you, I managed. I'm honored. And I accept. Good, Jennifer smiled. For the first time since I'd entered the room, David will work with you on the transition timeline and compensation package. Your first official day in the new role will be Monday, August 14th. What about Cassandra? Cassandra will continue in her current role, reporting to you. We've made it clear that this transition represents an opportunity for her to demonstrate her commitment to collaborative and ethical professional practices. David's tone was carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Cassandra was on probation after they dismissed me. I walked back to my desk in a daze. The office was mostly empty, most people had left for the weekend, but I could see light coming from under Cassandra's door. She was working late, probably preparing for interviews that were no longer going to happen. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something more complex, a mixture of relief, anticipation, and a strange kind of sadness for what was about to be lost. Because I knew that when Cassandra found out about my promotion, everything would change, not just at work, but at home. Not just between us, but between me and Marcus, between me and my parents, between me and the family dynamic that had shaped my life for 32 years. I was about to become the person who'd gotten ahead by exposing family secrets, the person who'd chosen career advancement over family loyalty, the person who'd broken the unspoken rule that you protect your own, no matter what. Except that hadn't been the rule Cassandra was following. She'd been protecting herself, advancing herself, building her success on my work while making sure I could never get proper credit for it. I sat at my desk for a long time. That evening, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay and thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between loyalty and enabling, about the price of speaking truth and the price of staying silent. Finally, I packed up my things and headed home. I had a new job to prepare for, and a conversation with my family that I wasn't looking forward to having. The call came at 7 o'clock Saturday morning. I was making coffee in my kitchen when my phone buzzed with Marcus's number. "Nora, what the hell did you do?" His voice was sharp with anger and disbelief. In the background, I could hear Cassandra crying. "I applied for a job and got it," I said as calmly as I could manage. "You got Cassandra fired." "Cassandra wasn't fired. She still has her job." "You know what I mean? You sabotaged her promotion, and now she's going to have to work for you. Her sister-in-law. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for her?" I took a deep breath. "Marcus, did Cassandra tell you why she didn't get the promotion?" "She said you made up some story about her stealing your ideas." "I didn't make up anything. I documented a pattern of behavior that had been going on for 18 months. "What pattern of behavior?" So I told him everything. The systematic appropriation of my analysis, the repackaging of my strategic insights, the way she'd built her reputation on work that had originated from my research. I told him about the ESG presentation, about the board bonus, about all the family dinners where she'd taken credit for collaborative conversations that had never happened. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Even if that's true," he said finally, "she's family. You could have talked to her about it. You could have worked it out between yourselves." "Could I?" "When?" "At family dinners where she was telling everyone how generous I'd been with sharing my expertise. At work events where she was positioning herself as my mentor. When exactly should I have had that conversation?" "You could have tried." "I did try. Not directly, maybe, but I tried to get credit for my own work. I tried to speak up at meetings and presentations. Every time I did, it sounded like I was repeating points that Cassandra had already made more eloquently." "So you went to her boss instead?" "I went to my boss, the same boss. We work for the same company, Marcus." I could hear Cassandra's voice in the background, saying something I couldn't make out. Marcus covered the phone for a moment, then came back. "She says you've always been jealous of her success." That stung, even though I'd expected it. "Ask her to name one conversation where I shared market analysis with her. Ask her to explain how she developed her strategic framework for ESG investing. Ask her where she got the data for her presentation about emerging markets volatility. Those are her ideas. Those are my ideas." documented in internal memos that were circulated weeks before she presented them as her strategic insights. Another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was tired. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly the way you're reacting now. Because I knew you'd see it as me attacking your wife instead of me protecting my own career. She is my wife, and I'm your sister, but apparently that doesn't mean anything when it conflicts with Cassandra's professional ambitions." The conversation ended badly, with Marcus angry and defensive, Cassandra devastated and furious, and me feeling like I'd just blown up my family for the sake of a job promotion. But on Monday morning, when I walked into my new office, Victoria's old office, with windows overlooking downtown Seattle and Elliott Bay beyond, I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd spent 8 years being invisible, letting someone else get credit for my strategic thinking, accepting the role of supporting player in my own career story. I'd been so afraid of seeming difficult or competitive that I'd allowed my professional identity to be systematically erased. No more. The first few weeks in my new role were challenging in ways I'd expected, and ways I hadn't. The expected challenges were logistical, learning new systems, building relationships with external partners, managing a team of creative professionals who approached problems differently than financial analysts. The unexpected challenges were political. Word had gotten around the office about why the CMO position had gone to me instead of Cassandra, and people were taking sides. Some of my new team members were clearly resentful about having to report to someone from outside their department, especially someone whose promotion had come at the expense of their former colleague. Cassandra herself was professionally polite, but personally distant. She attended meetings, completed assignments, and participated in team discussions with perfect professionalism and obvious reluctance. She never challenged my authority directly, but there was a coolness in every interaction. That made it clear she was complying under protest. I could have made things easier by pretending that nothing had happened, by treating her like any other team member and ignoring the history between us. Instead, I decided to address the situation directly. 2 weeks into my new role, I asked Cassandra to stay after a team meeting. "I know this transition has been difficult," I said once the conference room had cleared. "And I know that working for me is probably not how you imagine your career developing." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No, it's not. I want you to know that I don't take any pleasure in how things have worked out. I didn't pursue this position to hurt you or to prove a point. I pursued it because I believed I was qualified and because I had ideas about how our department could better serve our clients. Ideas that you claimed I'd stolen from you. Ideas that you had repurposed from my analysis without attribution." "There's a difference." Cassandra was quiet for a moment, and I could see her weighing her response carefully. "I never meant to take credit for your work," she said finally. "When I used insights from your analysis, I thought of it as building on collaborative discussions. I didn't realize you saw it as intellectual theft." It was a careful non-apology, the kind of response that acknowledged wrongdoing without accepting responsibility for it. "Cassandra, we never had collaborative discussions about market analysis. We barely spoke at work beyond pleasantries. You got access to my analysis through internal reports and used it to inform your strategic presentations without acknowledging the source. That's how strategy works. You synthesize information from multiple sources and create a coherent narrative." "Yes, but you identify your sources. You give credit where credit is due. You don't present other people's research as your original thinking." She looked out the conference room window, her jaw tight with frustration or anger or embarrassment. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to be successful in your role. I want you to contribute to our team's success. And I want you to do it with integrity and transparency. And if I can't work for you, then you should find a position where you can be successful and comfortable I won't make that decision for you, but I also won't pretend that our professional relationship can go back to the way it was before. It was a hard conversation, but I felt better after having it. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd set clear expectations, and I'd given Cassandra the choice about how she wanted to move forward. She chose to stay, at least for the time being. Over the next several months, she settled into her role with what seemed like grudging acceptance. She was competent, professional, and properly collaborative. She attended team meetings, contributed to strategic discussions, and executed her assignments with her usual polish. But the warmth was gone. The casual intimacy that had once characterized our family interactions had been replaced by careful courtesy. She was polite to me at family gatherings, but she no longer included me in her professional storytelling. She no longer positioned us as collaborative partners in Meridian's success, which was exactly what I'd wanted, even though it felt like a loss. The bigger loss was my relationship with Marcus. He'd eventually accepted that my promotion was legitimate, and that Cassandra's behavior had been professionally inappropriate. But he'd never forgiven me for the way I'd handled it. "You could have come to me first," he said during one particularly difficult family dinner. "You could have given us a chance to address it privately before you went to Jennifer. And would you have believed me? If I'd told you that Cassandra was taking credit for my work, would you have taken my word over hers?" Marcus didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. My parents were caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both their children, while navigating a conflict they didn't fully understand. They were proud of my promotion there. Daughter had finally gotten the recognition she deserved, but they were also worried about family unity and the tension that now characterized every gathering. "I just don't understand why you couldn't work it out between yourselves," my mother said during one of our weekly phone calls. "You're both successful, professional women. Surely you could have found a way to resolve this without involving the company." It was the same thing everyone kept saying, and I was tired of explaining why it wasn't that simple. The problem hadn't been a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with better communication. It had been a systematic pattern of intellectual appropriation that had undermined my professional development for years. But families don't operate on professional principles. Families operate on loyalty and forgiveness, and the assumption that blood relationships supersede everything else. Except when they don't. 6 months after my promotion, Cassandra accepted a position as communications director at a tech startup downtown. Her last day at Meridian was professionally cordial. She cleaned out her office, said goodbye to colleagues, and wished our team success in future endeavors. She didn't say goodbye to me personally. At her farewell party, held at an upscale restaurant in Belltown, she gave a speech about professional growth and new challenges. She thanked her colleagues for their support, praised Jennifer's leadership, and wished everyone continued success. She never mentioned me, not even as her former supervisor, or as a family member. It was as if I'd been erased from her Meridian narrative entirely. But I understood the message. This was how our story was going to end, not with dramatic confrontation or public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but with quiet professional separation and the gradual dissolution of a relationship that had been built on unequal terms from the beginning. A year later, I was established in my role as CMO, leading a team that had grown to trust my strategic vision and appreciate my collaborative leadership style. We'd launched several successful initiatives that had attracted new clients and strengthened relationships with existing ones. Our quarterly communications now reflected genuine strategic thinking rather than repackaged analysis. And our marketing materials had earned recognition from industry publications. More importantly, I'd found my voice, not just professionally, but personally. I no longer felt like I needed to minimize my achievements or defer to someone else's version of my success story. The cost had been significant. My relationship with Marcus remained strained, though we were slowly rebuilding trust and communication. Cassandra and I were polite strangers at family gatherings, exchanging pleasantries, but never engaging in real conversation. The easy intimacy of extended family dinners had been replaced by careful courtesy and unspoken tension. But I'd gained something too. I'd gained the knowledge that I could stand up for myself when it mattered, that I could choose professional integrity over family peace, that I could trust my own judgment even when everyone around me suggested I should compromise or stay silent. I'd learned that sometimes protecting yourself requires disappointing people who expect you to prioritize their comfort over your own dignity. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first started noticing the patterns in Cassandra's work. I'd somehow thought that exposing the truth would lead to acknowledgement, apology, and eventual reconciliation. Instead, it had led to separation, professional consequences, and lasting changes in family dynamics. But as I sat in my office on a grey Seattle afternoon, watching the ferries cross Elliott Bay with their quiet determination, I realized that I was okay with that outcome. I'd chosen to be the kind of person who spoke up when something was wrong, even when it was difficult, even when it cost me relationships that had been important to me, even when it meant being seen as the family member who cared more about her career than about keeping everyone happy, because the alternative had been to remain invisible, to let my professional identity be defined by someone else's narrative, to accept a supporting role in my own success story. And I'd been invisible long enough. Last month, Marcus called to tell me that Cassandra had been promoted to Vice President of Communications at her new company. She was featured in a Seattle Business Journal article about rising leaders in the tech industry, and her strategic vision was praised as innovative and forward-thinking. "She's doing really well," he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. Whatever had happened between us professionally, I'd never wanted Cassandra to fail. I just wanted her to succeed on her own merits, without building her reputation on my work. She says she's learned a lot from the experience at Meridian. Marcus continued, about collaboration and attribution and professional integrity. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was likely to get. And I decided it was enough. "That's good," I said. "Those are important lessons." "Yeah." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Listen, Nora, I've been thinking about what happened, and I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did. I might not have handled it the same way, but I understand that you felt like you didn't have other options. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was progress. Thank you for saying that. I miss talking to you the way we used to, before everything got complicated. I miss that too." We talked for another few minutes about work and weekend plans and our parents' health. Normal sibling conversation, careful but genuine. It felt like the beginning of something. Maybe not the relationship we'd had before, but a new kind of relationship that could accommodate the people we'd become. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by my living room window, looking out at the lights reflecting on Elliott Bay. The ferries were still running, their evening routes, cutting through dark water with steady purpose. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, competent but invisible, successful but uncredited, frustrated but afraid to speak up for herself. That woman would probably look at my life now and see loss. A damaged family relationship, a sister-in-law who'd become a stranger, holiday gatherings that would always carry an undercurrent of tension and unresolved conflict. But I looked at my life and saw something different. I saw a woman who'd finally learned to value her own contributions, who'd chosen difficult truth over comfortable silence, who'd decided that being respected mattered more than being liked. I saw someone who'd stopped watching from the sidelines of her own career and started directing her own success story. That was worth the cost, even when the cost was higher than I'd expected. The next morning, I got to the office early and found an email from a headhunter in my inbox. A Fortune 500 company was looking for a chief strategy officer, someone who could bridge financial analysis and market positioning. Someone with a track record of building collaborative teams and delivering measurable results. The salary range was significantly higher than my current compensation. The role would involve working with C-suite executives and board members on long-term strategic planning. It was exactly the kind of position that would have been unimaginable to me 2 years ago, when I was still letting someone else define my professional potential. I read through the job description twice, then forwarded it to my personal email account. I wasn't ready to leave Meridian yet. I had too many initiatives in progress, and too much investment in the team I'd built. But it was good to know that opportunities like this existed, that my reputation had grown beyond the confines of one company, that other organizations saw strategic value in the skills I'd been developing for years. I was no longer the woman who doubted whether she deserved recognition for her own work. I was the woman who'd learned to document her achievements, speak up for her contributions, and make strategic career moves that reflected her actual capabilities. It had taken me 34 years and one devastating family conflict to figure that out. But I'd finally gotten there, and as I settled into my morning routine coffee, email, review of the day's meetings and priorities, I felt something I'd never experienced before in my professional life. I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing work that reflected my actual abilities, with people who respected my strategic thinking, because they knew it was genuinely mine. That afternoon, I was walking through the office when I'd passed the conference room, where I'd once sat through Cassandra's presentation about ESG investment opportunities. The same conference room where she'd presented my analysis as her strategic vision, where she'd received praise and recognition for insights that had originated from my research. For just a moment, I allowed myself to imagine how that meeting would have gone if I'd been the one presenting. If I'd had the confidence then that I had now. If I'd understood my own value the way I understood it today. But then I realized that imagining alternate histories was pointless. I couldn't change what had happened, but I'd changed what was happening now. I'd changed what would happen next. And maybe that was the real lesson of the past 2 years. Not that I'd gotten revenge on someone who'd wronged me, but that I'd finally learned to protect my own interests with the same strategic thinking I'd been applying to everyone else's problems. Maybe the real victory wasn't that Cassandra had faced consequences for her behavior, but that I'd stopped allowing her behavior to define my professional trajectory. I'd learned to see myself the way I deserved to be seen, and once that happened, it became impossible for anyone else to make me invisible again. 2 weeks later, I was preparing for our quarterly board presentation when Jennifer knocked on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, of course. She sat down across from my desk with an expression I'd come to recognize, the same focused intensity she'd had when I first brought the documentation about Cassandra's behavior to her attention. "I wanted to give you a heads up about something," she said. "The board has been discussing succession planning, and your name has come up in several conversations about future executive leadership." My heart jumped. Executive leadership? We're not talking about immediate changes, but we're thinking strategically about the next 5 to 10 years. Your handling of the CMO transition, your ability to build bridges between departments, your track record with strategic thinking, all of that has been noticed at the highest levels. I felt that familiar surge of vindication, tempered now by experience and realistic expectations. What does that mean practically? It means you should be thinking about what kind of executive role you'd eventually want to pursue. CFO, COO, maybe even CEO down the road. It means we want to make sure you're getting the experience and exposure you'd need to be competitive. For those positions, CFO, COO, CEO. 2 years ago, those titles would have seemed as distant as winning the lottery. Now they felt like logical extensions of the career trajectory I'd been building. I'd be interested in exploring those opportunities. Good, because we'd hate to lose you to another company that recognized your potential before we did. After Jennifer left, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing what she'd told me. The headhunter email suddenly seemed less like an interesting possibility, and more like confirmation that I'd finally become the kind of professional that other organizations wanted to recruit. I thought about calling Marcus to share the news, then decided against it. Some victories were worth celebrating privately first, savoring the moment of recognition before sharing it with people who might complicate the joy with their own agendas and interpretations. Instead, I called my parents and told them about Jennifer's conversation. My mother cried actual tears of pride and happiness. My father, who'd worked construction for 40 years and never made more than $50,000 in a single year, kept saying, "Executive leadership. Can you believe it? Our daughter, executive leadership." That night, I treated myself to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Pioneer Square, the kind of place where I used to go only for work events or special occasions. I sat at the bar with a glass of excellent wine and a perfectly prepared meal, watching the other diners and thinking about trajectories and choices and the difference between where you start and where you end up. A woman at a nearby table was celebrating what looked like a work promotion with friends. She was maybe 25, animated and confident, describing her new responsibilities with the kind of enthusiasm I remembered from my early career. I hoped she was better than I'd been at protecting her own interests. I hoped she'd learned earlier than I had to document her contributions, speak up for her ideas, and never assume that good work would be recognized automatically. But if she hadn't learned those lessons yet, I hoped she'd figure them out before anyone convinced her that being generous with her expertise was more important and getting credit for it, because the world was full of people who would take advantage of that generosity, and some of them would be sitting at your family dinner table, smiling while they rewrote your achievements as their collaborative insights. I'd learned that the hard way, but I'd learned it completely, and now I was sitting in an expensive restaurant, drinking excellent wine, thinking about executive leadership opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept the limitations that other people try to impose on your success. Sometimes it's learning to value yourself the way you deserve to be valued, regardless of who finds that threatening or inconvenient. Sometimes it's just becoming impossible to ignore. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And remember, your voice matters more than keeping the peace. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.